Welcome to episode 191 of the Outdoor Biz Podcast. As we hurtle towards the end of the decade, I want to take a minute and wish a happy holidays to you and yours. Thank you for making the Outdoor Biz Podcast part of your life and routine. I'm thankful for all my talented, inspiring podcast guests in the outdoor and adventure community. They help bring vibrancy every single day. Listeners often ask if I have a favorite episode of the Outdoor Biz Podcast, and I don't. It's such an honor. I have so much fun speaking with each and every guest to provide you with wonderful stories and industry insight. And my question to you is, how may I serve you better? Drop me a line at rick@ricksays.com and let me know. Thanks. And let's get on to the show. We are headed into a 2-week break where we will be dropping replays of 2019's most popular episodes. And we're wrapping up the year with Steve Casimiro, publisher of the Adventure Journal. Steve tells us how they produce the fine journalism delivered daily through AJ, and I particularly enjoyed his comments about how they stay true to their values and goals of delivering inspiring stories and high-quality imagery. I admire those efforts, Steve, and aim to do the same with this podcast. Thank you, and enjoy my conversation with Steve Casimiro. Hey, Steve, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Rick.
Great to be catching up with you. What's going on down there today in the OC? The rain stopped?
Well, we're between issues. The rain's passed by. It's clearing up. Our soil down here there's a lot of clay in it, and so it takes a good 2 to 3 days until things dry out, which is a little frustrating because we'll get these storms that come through, and then you gotta wait. It tamps the dust down, and the riding is just so sweet. But then you gotta let it dry out. So and it's obviously Southern California there's so much urban runoff, so you got to give the ocean time to settle down. You got to give the trail time to settle down. So it's sort of it's actually in some ways it's good because you get work done. We're between issues, so we just printed our winter issue, and now we're getting started on spring. So it's kind of this nice interstitial pre-holiday where we can kind of catch our breath. And,
a little bit of a break. How much
catch up on some things? Yeah.
How much of a break do you have? I mean, how much of a slow period do you have between issues? Is it like a week, 10 days, 2 days?
Well, there should really be no slow period. I mean, we should just be kind of ongoing. But
but I mean, AJ, I'm sure you're cranking it out, scrambling.
It depends on the issue. I mean, there have been periods where I just sort of put everything on pause for like a month. Because one of the things that's important to know is that I'm the only full-time person working on AJ.
Gotcha.
Joni, my wife, and our art director doesn't work on it full-time. Justin Hausman, who's our online editor, he's a contract editor. He doesn't work on it full-time, close to it, but not. So we basically, we've got some amazing contract people and friends who work with us and help build it, but we don't have a staff, basically. And so what will happen is we'll get off of deadline, and then because so many of the things funnel through me, whether it's social media or ad sales or tweaking the design of the website or whatever, all that stuff gets kicked to the side when we're on print deadline because you have a hard deadline.
Sure.
And so now is the period when I start to catch up on those things. And so then you'll end up with kind of a compressed deadline for the next issue because you've been dealing with these other things. So it's human nature.
Yeah, I can relate. This is all
everybody can.
This is new on the podcast deadline thing for me, but it's just like, and it's like waves on the beach, right? I mean, whether it's an issue or an episode, it just keeps coming at you. So
so we're in good shape though. I mean, we've got most of I'd say about 80% of the issue is planned and or assigned, and
cool.
About probably 70% of the summer issue is planned and assigned. So, we're working pretty well down the road. I think it's a function of making those long-term deadlines a part of bringing a part of your workflow earlier on. And then it's classic, right? Like, you deal with fires that are biggest right in front of you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I have everything in the can through January, but every once in a while I get a guest that I want to push up. So that's what I'm doing with yours. We'll do this publish this next Tuesday. But it's I can relate to that, yeah. So let's start off with how you got introduced to the outdoors.
Well, I was a suburban kid. I grew up outside Washington, D.C., and in those years, kids just spent more time outside.
Yeah, we all did,
I mean, we just, that was the lifestyle. I had a bike and I had a skateboard, and there were parks, and we did whatever. And then when I was in I was in Boy Scouts, and then when I was in like 11, my parents bought this rundown cabin in Pennsylvania, and so I spent a lot of time outside there. So I was, we did car camping. My parents weren't super outdoorsy, but we did car camping. For me, everything kind of came into registration when I think it was about 14 or 15, and I did like a mini outward bound. It was a
cool.
week or 10 days in West Virginia. We did a canoe trip on the New River and backpacking and climbing and, technical rock climbing and all that. And so I was able to actually have some guided education and exposure to it. And I just loved it. I loved it.
Fell in love. Yeah.
And then as I, got my driver's license and, had a bit of money in my pocket from working and was able to get out and do things. And that's where all my energy went. I was kind of self-empowered at that point, and got a car and not a bike. And I was able to, I always wanted to ski. And so I was able to go skiing for the first time. And,
cool.
And my best friend's brother was into rock climbing. And so he was, he sort of taught me, how to do pro and the knots and all that sort of stuff. And so, it was a process. It was definitely a process, but it was very self-driven. I saw that world. It looked cool. When I got an exposure to it, it was cool. And then I just wanted more of it.
More of it. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. How'd you get into journalism? You've had a great career with some prestigious magazines and founded Bike magazine. That's awesome.
Oh, thank you.
And I think I saw your degrees in journalism. I think I was doing a little research. Did I see that?
Yeah, well, it was a communications degree with a focus on journalism. So my school didn't have a pure journalism degree. I went to George Mason University, but it was super self-directed. I was the photo editor of the school, the weekly paper for a couple of years, and I had a good mentor, a journalism mentor, and one of the professors, and I actually ended up getting a part-time job at USA Today in my junior year, and I was working in the money section on the copy desk. And so it was, I grew up in the era of Watergate, and my first job actually was I delivered newspapers as a kid. I delivered the Washington Star, and so growing up around DC, you really have a sense of the fourth estate, and you have a sense of the power of newspapers and the importance of newspapers and of the media. And so it was just a part of the fabric of the local culture in ways I think that it isn't necessarily in other places. And so I just thought that was cool. I thought it was amazing that, the idea of speaking truth to power. And I have a very strong self-righteous streak on when things are, I think are unjust. And I think one of my biggest pet peeves is hypocrisy. And there's nothing more hypocritical than somebody who takes an oath of office and then, feathers their nest through corruption or dealing. And so I saw all that, and I felt like that was, really seemed like a calling. But the difference was, though, that I was really focused on photography. That was my earliest thing, and it wasn't really until I ended up in college and then working at USA Today that I started writing, and then I was able to weave those two things together, and to write and to shoot, depending on what my job entailed, or I did a lot of freelancing. Even in high school, I was stringing.
Oh, cool!
As a photographer, and then I was working with magazines in DC as a freelancer in my early 20s. And so, I think early on, I saw that you could kind of do, if you worked really hard at it, you could do both. And it gave you more diversification, which as a freelancer is just critical.
That's big, yeah. And then you made a career out of it. So, what was the catalyst for launching the Adventure Journal? Fast forward.
Well, I think you have to say, I think that it was an evolution of a lot of things. When I was at Powder, I was at Surfer Publications for about 11, a little less than 12 years, and I was the editor of Powder for a long time, and I was a founding editor of Bike, and so I was involved with that launch. I had a very small hand in the launch of Snowboarder. I helped launch a golf magazine that didn't survive, which I don't know anything about golf, but we were trying to apply sort of the principles of enthusiast magazines to that. So I was around a lot of startups and a lot of these smaller enthusiast books, and then I worked with National Geographic Adventure for about 11 years, and so I got exposure with really small, super hyper-focused enthusiast books, and then this larger book. And way, way, way back in the day, I felt like I wanted, even at Powder, I had this vision of what an outdoor magazine could be, and I just didn't see it. I thought, Outside has done fantastic work over the years, and was Mountain Gazette, there were, Men's Journal, part of National Geographic Adventure, that was an amazing magazine, but none of them really reflected the outdoors the way that I saw them.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was still at NGA, I started blogging, and then when NGA went under in print in late 2009, I turned AJ into a commercial site and started accepting advertising. And so the genesis for print really started actually with the online, and the online was I had these ideas that I felt like were important to the outdoor culture, that the other folks that I was working with, that wasn't part of their editorial mix.
Okay.
And I wanted to pursue those ideas, those story ideas or people or things that I thought were interesting or important, even if they didn't necessarily were fit with a formula or were guaranteed to attract a lot of viewers or whatever. I felt like they were important, and I wanted to do them because I felt like they were important.
Yeah.
And so I did that, and for many years with the website, and tried some really ambitious things, and sometimes they worked and sometimes they didn't. And I came to the conclusion, one, that the more sort of nuanced and what I felt were more important stories and longer stories probably weren't going to get the traffic that they deserved to basically be profitable, to justify a positive ROI online.
Right.
I was never going to have enough revenue my ambitions were higher for AJ, and I was never going to be able to create enough revenue with traditional online media models in order to bring in the kind of writers and photographers I wanted, to pay people in an appropriate way for those more ambitious stories.
Yeah.
And so ultimately it was I think it was an expression of a higher, broader ambition, wanting to tell more important stories, to reach people in a different way, and also to have an alternative to screens. I mean, aren't we all exhausted by screens?
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
especially,
and the, Marshall McLuhan, the medium is the message. And I think that, AJ is like, if you're scrolling on your phone, AJ is not fundamentally different from the New York Times or anything else, because the medium is still the same, right?
Yeah,
it's just it's a different voice.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's important to frame the context with which you experience these stories. And people ask us lots of times, especially our international friends, like, well, what about a digital edition? And we looked at it long and hard, and I'm sure it would bring in a lot more revenue, but ultimately that's not how we want AJ to be experienced. And so it is kind of a gift that we give ourselves. Like, this is the reading experience that we want for these stories. And print was the only way to do that.
Yeah, no, I admire that. I mean, you have to stick to your guns and sticks to what motivates you and your vision. And I think that's a great lesson for others that are trying to do things and launch things, is you don't have to do all of it, right? You can focus and narrow down and do exactly what you want to do. That's great. I love that. How about what have been some of the most challenging issues you've covered? You devoted to outdoor adventure in all its form. What are some challenging things that you've covered?
Challenging in what way?
Either travel-wise or trying to create a story out of something that might not have been there in the first place. Anything challenging that comes to mind?
Yeah. I mean, it's like anything. It's a sausage making. You don't really want to know what's behind the scenes. It's fairly standard issue stuff. I mean, I think I think the biggest challenge that we have is that I feel that our AJ's voice is really different, and our goals are really different. And in some ways that can be kind of nuanced. And so I think communicating, especially if we have an idea that we want executed from a writer, and we bring the idea to them, is getting on the same page about what we want. So I think our biggest challenges have been when you have a vision of the story and you take it to a writer and you communicate it as best you can, and the writer has all their own goals, and they take it and they filter it, and sometimes that works fantastically, and sometimes it doesn't, and then you're kind of left. So okay, what do we do to this? But I would say that just if we have one of those an issue, it's a lot. Like, we just don't really tend to have those kind of things. There's just things just come up. We had this one story where it was actually a piece that I had discovered online many years ago. It was I'm not sorry going to go into details because I
That's
don't
okay.
want to throw this person under the bus. But
Nope, that's
it was
not
a
what
piece
we're
I
aiming for.
found,
Yeah.
and I thought this could make an interesting adaptation for AJ. And at the 11th hour, they were very insistent that it didn't fit what we had done, even though it looked really great. It didn't fit their vision of what they wanted for it, and they basically held the high res hostage.
Wow.
It was like, and this was days before we were going to print, and we had to appease them,
Wow.
and so that, I think the lesson for me was like just a failing in communication on our part early on. Like we just need to make really clear what our terms are and what our expectations are.
Yeah.
In the end, the story came out great, and it was one of the pieces that I'm most happy with. But it was just a nightmare of stress coming down to the end. And so I think that you cannot possibly anticipate all the things that can go wrong.
Right.
But the more that you can communicate things up front. But that's like one story out of, I don't know, hundreds that we've done.
That's really good.
Stories are really fantastic, and the kind of feedback that we get from our writers and photographers is usually that they're thrilled with what we've done with the layout. Joni's an amazing designer.
You guys do an amazing job, and that speaks to your communication too. It speaks to how you clearly identify your goals and outcomes, and that's significant in anything that we do, I think.
I think it's testament that people understand what AJ is. And I also think that there's a pent up demand to tell good stories, because now either people are churning for social to get more likes on Instagram, to get more exposure, to get paid work, or magazines that do exist are pretty formulaic. And I think that I don't think that we have a formula. I think we're just trying to tell great stories.
Yeah.
And so I do think it's a refreshing take on editorial. It's an old school take on editorial. And I want the writers and photographers and artists who work with us, I want us to be a vehicle for them to do their best work and to have the best presentation. At least, that's what we're aiming for. And so I think everybody's on board. I think
you're pulling it off. I think you're doing a great job with that. Yeah. How about some inspiring adventures you've published? Do you have a most inspiring?
I think almost everything we.
I know you guys get some great stuff.
I mean, I don't know where to start. Almost. I mean, I think about
every issue's got something. It's like, oh man.
Yeah, I mean, the winter. We just finished this last winter issue, so winter 2019, and it's getting cold, it's snowing, and last winter's issue, I think, had a couple of really interesting pieces that jumped out at me, like the cover shot from Jeff Coombs, who's doing, under ice lake diving in eastern Canada, or the guys who are using Nordic skates to conduct expeditions in Alaska because the snow is less consistent, but it's still cold. In this winter issue, Kelly Cordes wrote this really amazing piece about this alpine climb that he did in the Alaska range, where you fly in and you fly out, and he was really struck on that as the transition between these two worlds. We called it between two worlds, and sort of this idea of the real world, like, oh, I'm back in the real world of emails and text and all that stuff, but like that doesn't feel like the real world. What feels like the real world is, when you're hunkered down in a trench, trying to figure out the path to the summit. That feels a whole lot more real. So, I think most of our stories are filled with stuff that are really inspirational. And one of the things that when we talk about adventure in all its forms, I mean, that is also metaphorical. And, one of the things that we're trying to do with our stories is tell universal human, or tap into universal human experiences. The adventures are often an excuse to explore, fear or striving or love. One of the favorite pieces that we ran was this one by Andy Kirkpatrick in our first year about climbing El Cap, and he's done that many, many times. He's done it solo, and Andy has had a tough path, and he's had a tough path on the relationship side, and has been self-destructive at times, and he ended up meeting this gal who climbed with him, and he took his daughter and his gal up El Cap, and he ended up proposing to her. He made a ring out of a piece of Perlon or webbing or something, and ended up proposing to her. And it's this gorgeous story about love and relationships, but it's also it's so interwoven with climbing and big walls and his climbing experience. And so I think that, most of AJ's stories are like that, where you take these human elements, love, failing, goals, whatever it is, and you weave that so intricately because it's so much a part of your identity, and it gets woven into your adventures, whether it's big wall climbing or ski touring or mountain biking or whatever. And so I think most of our pieces they have those elements to them, and you come away with, the writer is different from the beginning to the end of the story, and hopefully you as a reader have a different view from beginning to end.
I think a lot of adventures have those too, because I just interviewed Greg Blakeney a couple of weeks ago, and he talks about all his long bike rides, and I think about the long skis or the long paddles and things that I've done, and we get to spend long periods of time in silence with just our thoughts, and I think those things, when you go back and talk about them and write about them, those are a lot of the things that you talk about, in addition to whatever adventure you ran into. You flipped a boat and had to, rescue everybody. I mean, all those things are intertwined. So I love that. That's great. What are the criteria for a historical badass?
There's two. They have to be dead, and they have to be badass.
Okay, that's simple.
It's pretty simple. I mean, I think that obviously eras change, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
We go through time, and baby boomers are different from Gen X, different from millennials. I mean, we all have sort of grow up with these eras, and we're formed by them. And so, I think the people, especially as we look back, we live in such a golden era of recreational adventure now. Like we have incredible gear.
You get anywhere in the world, practically.
We can get anywhere in the world. Most everything has been climbed. Like we're familiar with it. There's still pockets where you can disappear, obviously, but I mean, a lot of it is known. And the further back you go in time, the more challenging things were with gear, the less was known, the less technology you had. Maps were not as accurate, or whatever it may be. And so in some ways, almost by definition, what people were doing 80 years ago or 60 years ago or 120 years ago was more adventurous because they had fewer resources. And what people did was outstanding or astounding. I mean, you look at the accomplishments of the early climbers, and it just makes your jaw drop. And so I don't know how many we've done now, 150 or something. We've done a lot. And the more you dig and the more you look, the more you find people who were accomplishing really incredible things and didn't really get a lot of attention. So, and I don't think that, there is, I guess, a little bit of a gee whiz, look what they did with what they had.
Yeah.
But that's not really the goal of historical badass. Like, oh, they did it in wool. Isn't that amazing? That's not the case, really. I mean, there's an element of that to it.
Right.
These are accomplishments that stand the test of time, generally, what people pulled off.
Right.
And if anything, I'd like to find, more contemporary badasses, people who are really doing incredible stuff but that don't get a lot of attention, which is really rare.
Yeah, that's the thing these days. It's rare to get attention with you can post from around the world, so that's pretty challenging. Do you have anything you working on anything now that you're intrigued about? Badass in the badassery category?
Not that I can talk about. We don't like to talk about what's upcoming. We just like to do it. So
good. Yeah, I wouldn't want you to spill the beans. Let's see. What outdoor activities do you participate in? Do you get out a lot? You must get on your bike almost every day, I'll bet.
I get on my gravel grinder on my mountain bike a lot. My main things are really skiing and riding. Those are the two things that I'm most into. Surfing to some extent, although I love the feeling of surfing. I love the experience of surfing. What I don't like or love are the crowds. And actually, Justin Hausman just wrote a wonderful piece for us about we called it, I think, deer mountain biking. You don't know how good you have it, something like that. And it was about Justin is new to mountain biking. His roots really are in surfing. And he grew up in California's Central Coast, and he was a local, and he was, he sort of earned his way up the pecking order. And surfing, as most people know, is very tribal. And in the better breaks, like it's super aggressive.
Yeah.
And even not, around here, I mean, even not on the better breaks, just because waves are a finite commodity and a finite resource, and good waves even more so, and everywhere's crowded.
Yeah.
And so just the experience of having to fight people to get waves just really blows. It really just blows. And so anyway, so Justin is new to mountain biking, and has just discovered like how incredibly warm and opening mountain bikers are to other mountain bikers, including new mountain bikers. And so, when I get in the water, I tend to body surf. I live like right above a beach. It's, I can be on my bike, I can be in the water in like 5 minutes.
Nice.
So
yeah.
I tend to just go down and get in the water and just do it that way, because it checks off all of those boxes of, being in a natural environment, being over my head, having a great time without a lot of gear getting in the way, and not having to hassle with other people.
Yeah.
So, but there's pretty much nothing that I don't do or won't do unless it really involves claustrophobia. So like caving is
spelunking is not your thing.
I'm really comfortable. I'm super comfortable on heights, and I climbed for a long time. I've ice climbed and done some mixed routes. I like that sort of stuff. I love ski mountaineering.
Yeah.
And I've really fallen in love with the Southwest in the last couple of decades, and I keep getting myself into these situations in slot canyons where they're just so beautiful and so amazing, and then I get in them, and I'm like, wait, I'm claustrophobic. What am I doing here?
Oh wow,
So
that can be
it's kind
scary.
of like, I've had some moments where I'm in there, and I've had other moments where I just had no choice, where you pull the rope and you keep going, and I just sort of have to push through it. And it's actually, it's a fascinating dynamic, actually, having a phobia and wanting to be in those situations, because the adventure of it is so amazing. And then, you don't really have a lot of control over phobias. And so, I've been out with people who are afraid of heights, and, that's not my thing. But I'm afraid of like being in enclosed places, and that's my thing.
Sure,
so,
right.
I don't know, like there's fodder there. Like it's not really something like we have not addressed sort of this dissonance between wanting to do something and
the
knowing
pull
that
of
you're
adventure,
really, where you're really uncomfortable there. It's a fascinating thing. And I keep, like with the canyons, I keep putting myself into these situations thinking, okay, well, you'll kind of work your way through it, or you'll feel more comfortable. And, we did this thing. I worked on 127 Hours in a film about Aaron Ralston, and a good friend of mine, Finley Xavier, was doing their EPK, their electronic press kit. That's all sort of the visual materials that go along with the movie. And so I was helping out with that, and Mikey Schaefer, who's a climber and a photographer, was there, and Kate Rutherford was a climber, and so we were just shooting a lot of stuff with Finlay in support of it. And we were in Utah, in the Robbers Roost area, and we got into this slot, and it was like this overhanging. It was super dark. There was like no room at all. You almost had to crawl, and you had to go through like this long tunnel to get to where it opened up. And Mikey and Kate and Finlay was like, "Oh, it's fine, it's no problem. It opens up here." And this other person and I were in this thing, and it was like, just I could like feel the weight of the rock, and I'm like, I'm good. I'm turning back. And so I don't know, like I'm more fascinated, like at this point in my career, and it being older than I was, which of course everybody is, but I mean, like, when I was younger, I just wanted to go out and prove myself, and I wanted to see exactly what I could do. And there are elements of that now, but I think that I'm far more fascinated with the intellectual elements, and with those why we do the things that we do, and why we find there, and when we choose to turn back. And those are all foundational principles of AJ. frankly, an adventure is not all that interesting unless something goes wrong. It's fun. It's awesome.
That's
You're
right.
stoked.
Yeah.
But from a storytelling standpoint or from a narrative standpoint, unless things go wrong or unless there's an internal dialogue or there's relationships between the characters and there's tension there,
Yeah.
then you start to get a story. And so those are the things that I'm most fascinated with. Like, well, why? And like, well, why do you keep doing this? And what is it that you're looking for? And, or why do you turn back or whatever?
Yeah.
I mean, those are the materials that we use to tell stories. And I think those are the materials we use to tell ourselves stories and our friends stories.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's interesting that why it's, I haven't been in too many of those situations other than you just get onto something that's big or tall or, big class 5 rapids ahead of you scares the crap out of you, but you go anyway. But it's interesting, that little delay, that little pause that you have.
Yeah, an editor once said to me, I was pitching a story on hiking this hut-to-hut route in Iceland, the Landmannalaugar route, and I was just really wanted to do it. And he goes, I just don't see a story there. He goes, you hike, you sleep, you get up and you hike. Which is like really cynical, but at the same time, like from an editorial perspective, it's completely valid. Like,
yeah,
what are you going to tell me? Like, unless you're the type of magazine that does stories just about the experience, but like if you're not a hiker,
right.
Why are you going to read that story? And one of the things that we're super cognizant of with AJ is that we want people, even if it's a surfing story, we want non-surfers to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
My mom is 86, and I tell people like, you got to make it so my mom's going to read this all the way through.
That's cool.
And what I mean by that is that these elements that we're talking about, the human element, the universal, the narrative story, it's not just like, you don't have to be an alpine climber to enjoy the story that Kelly wrote about going into climbing the Alaska.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right.
Anybody who has ever left an out of office reply on their email to go and take a weekend away can relate to this idea of between two worlds.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. That's good. Do you have any suggestions or advice for folks wanting to get into the outdoor adventure biz?
Boy, that could fill a book.
Yeah. Whether it be journalism
or... Yeah, I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, I think that like you just have to be self-directed.
Mm-hmm.
You have to have, and it's hard to know exactly what you want and why you want it. But I think that you just have to try to be as clear-eyed as you are about what your goals are. And I think you need to be professional and honest and ethical and network like heck and be rigorous in looking at what your competition is, whether you're starting a magazine or whether you're trying to break in as a blogger or a photographer. I mean, those are all really hard things to do, but I think just trying to be as objective as you can about why you're doing it. And then look at the other side is looking at people who might be hiring you or buying your product or whatever. Why would they want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
And you ultimately are you're selling yourself in one form or another,
right.
And what you're doing has to make somebody else's life better or easier or in some way. And whether it's getting a job as a rep or working PR or as a freelance photographer. And so I think that that's probably the mistake that I think most people make, and it's difficult if you haven't worked in the industry, but putting yourself in the shoes of the person who would be hiring you or buying your product and what do they want. And I get pitches all the time where I just want to say to people, like, have you ever actually read Adventure Journal? Like, I get PR people pitching me on things that are so like wildly outside of our scope.
Yeah.
And I know that that's their job, that they're trying to get stories. But if they did a little bit of research, they would understand that they're wasting their time on us.
Right.
And so I think doing that research, like if I want to work for Patagonia, what does Patagonia need? If I want to be a freelance photographer, how much of a market is there for photography? And so and with the internet, obviously, we have tremendous resources and LinkedIn and all these other things to be able to like get a sense of what that is. And so that's what this is the broadest tool that I can say.
No, that's well said. I think.
Why is like do your research.
Yeah.
Do your research on why somebody might hire you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and through that research, you may find that you don't want to do that or do something different. No, I think that's very well said. That's good advice. How about some favorite books? Or do you give books as gifts? Obviously, you give AJ a lot, but I mean, regular books.
Well, I don't have any go-tos.
Uh-huh.
I do actually give a lot of books. but they're really sort of situational to that person and to what situation they might be in or they might be going through. And so, I mean, I've given, I don't know how many copies of Desert Solitaire I've given you. I've given the classics.
Yeah.
Terry Tempest Williams is a dear friend, and I'm a fan of everything that she does. I've given a lot of copies of Refuge to people. I think, like, if you're looking for like something that almost anybody can like be moved by, I'm just a big fan of Peter Heller's fiction. We did an excerpt from The Dog Stars early on, but The River, The Painter. I mean, he's just he's an incredible writer, and his writing is I don't know if Peter writes poetry, but I know that even as a kid, he fell in love with poetry, and it's one of his passions. And he writes, his prose has a poetical rhythm to it, and it's beautiful. And so Peter spent many years as a freelance writer working for Men's Journal and other outdoor books. He's a paddler and a fly fisherman, and he's been on expeditions. And so he has a grounding in authentic adventure.
Oh, cool.
And this is one of the things that I think is you asked me early on about like why adventure journal, and one of the things that has struck me many years ago and continues to strike me is that the bigger titles that cover outdoors, that I don't necessarily recognize authenticity in them sometimes, but often you don't, and you think, well, this person is taking this story and it's really just become a commodity for them selling magazines. Adventure has become a commodity for them. They're just using it as some other thing that they can turn around and sell. And what I found in the outdoor culture was, one, it's very rich and people are amazing, and that you also, by, I think, approaching it the right way, you earn some respect and you give respect back to it. And so I think that that's what we're talking about when we talk about authenticity, and that people sort of do the right things for the right reasons and then don't crow about it. And so that's what that is one thing that we're trying to do that with everything that we do with Adventure Journal, is that we're just trying to share these stories about the outdoor adventure experience in a really honest way. We're not trying to convince you of anything. We're not trying to sell you of anything. We're just trying to write stories basically for our friends, whether we've met them yet or not. And I think that that's there. I mean, I think that's what people recognize. I hope, anyway.
No, I think you nailed it.
And so Peter, one of the things I love about Peter is that all of his books are informed by these experiences that he's had as an expedition paddler and other things. And yet they're incredible narratives and they're literary fiction. And that's extremely rare, to have somebody who's writing fiction at this level, and also like as an adventurer, that you will recognize yourself in them. They're just incredible.
I'll link to those in the show notes. I don't know about him. I'll have to pick up some of his stuff. That sounds very interesting. I'll look for that. Let's see. I know you got a hard stop. Before you run, let's talk about your favorite piece of outdoor gear under $100. Do you have one of those?
I don't. I don't really have any. I sort of gear is
a little gadget or something when you're cycling.
I think that I like things that last, and I like, especially if I give things to people, I want something, whether it's my kids or friends or whatever. I want something that is going to be applicable to a lot of situations and that they're going to have for a long time. And so, I really like tools, knives, tools.
I was just going to say, that's what mine is.
My favorite right now is the Leatherman Free. So Leatherman just came up with this new line over the last year where everything is sort of one-handed open, and everybody has a Leatherman of some sort. I think that they're the gold standard, and there's obviously other multi-tools out there, and some of them are great. But my experience has been I've been most comfortable with those, and so I think it's probably over $100. But something like a Leatherman, and I think they were all craving things that last and things that endure. And so I think something like that is. I don't think you can go wrong.
Yeah, that's good. I think you're right. Yeah. Is there anything else you'd like to say to our listeners as we wrap up, or ask of our listeners?
Yeah, actually, there is one thing. I was thinking about this, and in some ways, maybe it's a little self-serving because I think this is what we do. But regardless of Adventure Journal, regardless of whether people, come to AJ and find something they like, or already read AJ, or they subscribe, or regardless, we built on our everything we do is built on a foundation of ethical publishing.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by that is that we don't accept sponsored content. There's no native advertising. You cannot buy our social posts. We don't sell our gear reviews. It's more like old school journalism. And we write about the things that we write about. And,
mm-hmm.
and there's a couple of reasons for that. One, those are not effective methods. Two, it's somebody who has built his career based on journalism. It's kind of offensive to me that you would let somebody else pay you and then put it on in your magazine or on your website.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that people should be rigorous with how they make choices about where they spend their time and their money.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, to do the research on who sources their wool ethically, or who has fair trade, or whatever it is. I mean, it's very difficult to do on a daily basis, especially if you have things like Amazon Prime, where you can get any product, within a day for this kind of frictionless experience. But one thing that I know to be true of outdoor enthusiasts and people who have committed their lives to having adventures, whether it's backpacking or trail running or ski touring or whatever, is that we do have these values, these enduring values that are really critically important to us. Doing the right things for the right reasons, respect for nature, respect for your friends, leaving things better. I mean, these things are all really important to us.
Mm-hmm.
The outdoor culture is incredibly value driven. Our consumer culture is not value driven.
Not at all.
No, man, not in the least.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
we're seeing, I think that we're seeing a lot of the problems from that. We're seeing sort of this, this feral capitalism has brought us this, massive inequality and social unrest, and
mm-hmm.
it's just bad for everybody. And so I think that, we're seeing the rise of the B corporation, and we're seeing, I think it's mostly billionaires being paranoid and fearful that capitalism can collapse. But, we're even seeing sort of the business roundtable saying, businesses have to stand for more than profits.
Yeah.
And so, what we're trying to do, we stand for a lot more than profits, and we make decisions all the time with Adventure Journal that are probably not in our best financial interests, but are in the best interests of the reader, because it's the most ethical thing to do. So what I would say is that I think, whether it's in the outdoor culture or the outdoor media consumption, supporting brands, or in the broader culture, is just, I think people should be more mindful. I mean, we get to vote once every 4 years for president. We get to vote once every 2 years for our congressional representatives, and that matters. You look at the relationship, the amount of time we spend complaining about things culturally or politically or whatever, the amount of time that we actually, most of us do something that has an impact.
Yeah.
So, but where we spend our money has a tremendous amount of impact, and where we spend our time and what we click on has a tremendous impact. And so I guess I would just encourage people to live their values, whatever those values are. I would just encourage them to do that. And, we're trying to put our money where our mouth is with AJ. And I think that outdoor enthusiasts tend to be more cognizant of those things. And I would just say, think about where you're spending your money, and take the time to support companies that make things that are going to last, or that make things that are done in the right way. I think for too long, especially the outdoor media culture, like, they're just shoving gear down people's throats, and for the sake of getting more viewers or selling more ads or whatever. And I just don't think that the world is going to collapse if we continue to do that. We're already facing all kinds of challenges, but that's a way that we can be empowered every single day, and making those right decisions every single day feels really, really good.
Well said. Yeah, we're going to go down in flames if we keep making all the stuff we're making and trying to sell it to people. If people want to follow up with you, what's the best way to get back in touch with you? Are you on the socials?
You can find me. You can find us at adventure-journal.com. Cool. We have a contact page. We have a phone number. We're really accessible. Finding everything you need from AJ, whether it's subscribing or checking out our notebooks, or We do stories every single day. We have a daily digest newsletter. I mean, everything is at adventure-journal.com.
Cool. We'll link to that in the show notes. Well, it's been great chatting with you.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I appreciate the time.
If you want more of the Outdoor Biz Podcast, you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to go to the outdoorbizpodcast.com where you find all the episodes, show notes, and much, much more. Until next time, be sure to make time to get outside.